It's very damaging to the long-term national security of the United States. And I think for the international community, now looking at what's happening between Russia and China in particular, with India supporting it, there needs to be deep concern, particularly in Europe, about whether or not the problems like the Ukraine war and China's aggression in Asia, whether that's going to be managed or whether or not we're now seeing a tipping point in the wrong direction.
President Trump has said he's not concerned about an axis forming against the United States that includes Russia and China. It comes as Vladimir Putin has joined the North Korean leader Kim Jong-Un and China's Xi Jinping for a huge military parade tomorrow to mark 80 years since the end of the Second World War. The event is being seen as a show of military and diplomatic strength by Beijing and the Kremlin amidst negotiations with the US over tariffs and the war in Ukraine. Well, at his news conference in the White House this evening, Donald Trump did not acknowledge that meeting in China, but he was asked about what was happening with his efforts to get Putin to agree to a peace summit on Ukraine.
I don't want to. I have learned things that will be very interesting. I think in the next few days you'll find out.
Consequences if there isn't some type of announcement of a meeting with President Putin and President Zelensky? And what could those consequences be?
We're going to see what happens. We're going to see what they do and what happens. I'm watching it very closely. Last week they lost 7,000 between the two countries, 7,313 soldiers to be somewhat exact, for no reason whatsoever. And they're Russian and they're Ukrainian, but, you know, they're soldiers. I want to see it end.
Well, let's talk to Joel Rubin, who's a former US Deputy Assistant Secretary of State during the Obama administration. Good evening to you, Joel.
Good evening, Carol. Great to be with you.
Great to have you with us. It's quite a gathering, isn't it, there in Beijing? You've got President Xi, of course, as the host. He's already been welcoming President Putin, Narendra Modi from India. We've had the North Korean leader Kim Jong-Un arriving by train, lots of Eurasian leaders, and a huge military parade tomorrow. What do you make of what's happening there?
Yeah, all we're missing is Iran and maybe Sudan and maybe a couple other bad actors, and it'll be a whole big party. Look, you know, it's a real troubling moment from an American national security perspective to see this kind of combination of countries, quite frankly. The United States, for a number of years now, has been trying to isolate China. We clearly have been trying to isolate Vladimir Putin over the last several years. And we've been trying to build a strong relationship with India. And now, in almost one singular moment, all of that is getting blown up. It's very damaging to the long-term national security of the United States. And I think for the international community, now looking at what's happening between Russia and China in particular, with India supporting it, there needs to be deep concern, particularly in Europe, about whether or not the problems like the Ukraine war and China's aggression in Asia, whether that's going to be managed or whether or not we're now seeing a tipping point in the wrong direction.
Were you surprised that President Trump seemed to dismiss all of this? He said, well, you know, China needs the US more than we need them. He certainly didn't express any concern about this. I mean, is that just the Trump style, or do you think perhaps he should be taking this more seriously?
Well, it's very embarrassing, quite frankly, for the president right now, because he came into office with a couple of very clear points. The first one being that he had a strong relationship with Vladimir Putin and could therefore resolve the war between Russia and Ukraine within a day with one phone call, remember, famously, he said. And then second, he really wants to, and has been since his first term, trying to punish China, isolate China, push back on China. And so to see what's happening now is a real demonstration of the failure of these two worldviews. And you add to that, again, India, I can't say it enough, that the shift in American-Indian relations only over the last several weeks has been dramatic and stark and contrary to the last several decades of American strategy towards peeling India away from China and bringing them closer to the United States. These are very embarrassing outcomes for this White House.
And of course, President Trump increased tariffs on India in part to punish it for India's decision to get so much of its oil and gas from Russia. But what India seems to have done is simply say, right, well, in that case, we'll get more of the stuff that we need from both Russia and China.
That didn't work. That didn't work at all, did it? And ultimately, arrogance can make one feel, and as Americans, we're quite we have a strong history of arrogance when it comes to international affairs in terms of overthinking how powerful we can be if we go it alone. That's why I'm a strong proponent of alliances through diplomacy to really increase our power and our ability to influence global events. So we think we can go it alone, and we can't. And this is a demonstration that we can't. And you add to that with India, it's become personal, which is a very strange dynamic because President Trump and Prime Minister Modi, for years, they had a very good relationship going back to his first term. But apparently there was an ego clash over taking credit for the end of the war a couple of months ago between Pakistan and India over Kashmir. And that began this negative spiral where we now see a very cold relationship and in the Indian public commentary, hostility now to the Trump administration. That is a very dangerous dynamic. We cannot afford to lose that relationship.
We're clearly seeing strengthening economic alliances now between these leaders, but military alliances too, because Russia is already getting support from North Korean troops. It is believed to be getting some of its weaponry from China. And we're going to see this huge, apparently very high-tech military display in Beijing tomorrow. What do you think that President Xi is trying to do here? What is the signal that he's trying to send?
Well, he certainly is flexing. And if President Xi can build the type of bilateral military-to-military relationship with Russia that Vladimir Putin is seeking, that will be a direct threat to Europe and to NATO by having Chinese weaponry directly inside Europe in a hot war. And that has been something that for a number of years now, we, the United States, have opposed. Clearly, the Biden administration did, Congress did. Nobody wants to see that here in the United States. And China, while there were clearly reports of some type of weapons transfer and sale, nothing of such magnitude as what we'll see on display in the coming days. And I think that China would be very wise to not do that. But the possibilities are higher today than they ever have been that they will. And that would, of course, enable Russia to maintain its war for a significantly longer period than they seem capable of doing. And they seem to have a lot of time available to them. And also, again, be a direct threat to NATO and to Europe through Russia.
Yeah, I mean, I'm seeing these reports that the United States is going to be looking very closely at this array of hypersonic missiles, which China seems to be not only just making no secret of, but actually putting on display. And Pete Hegseth, the US Defense Secretary, is reported in the Times tonight to have said shortly before he took office that he feared that these missiles could wipe out all of America's aircraft carriers in the first 20 minutes of a war. I mean, this is a nation there, President Xi, who really seems to be using this parade as something of a show of defiance towards the US.
It certainly is. And the question will, of course, be, is this bluster or is this real? And again, I go back to the core concern of our conversation, which is that when you have Vladimir Putin in Beijing, out of the diplomatic wilderness, supported by Narendra Modi, a longtime American ally, this now changes the dynamic of what China believes is possible versus what it may have thought earlier. And it has the hardware. This has never been a surprise. It has nuclear weapons. It's never been a surprise. The only question has been, did it have the diplomatic desire and the political capacity to deploy these weapons into theaters that could potentially threaten the United States and Europe? And so this is why India is so important, to keep that pressure on. Now India is away. And so we are potentially facing a new chessboard related to China.
Just finally, we heard President Trump saying there that he'd learned something about President Putin. We've had frequent signals from the president of the United States that he might be prepared to take some action against President Putin if he fails to come to the negotiating table. Of course, we had the red carpet literally rolled out for President Putin. Since then, there's been absolutely no movement in terms of trying to get peace talks going, instead of which Russia has simply stepped up its attacks on Ukraine. Do you think that President Trump is going to take any kind of action in terms of perhaps sanctions or further steps against President Putin if he fails to shift on this?
Well, if you think about the pillars of pressure on Russia, there are three. There's political isolation, there's economic sanctions, and then there's military support for Ukraine. And the political isolation was ended in that Alaska summit with the bear hug, with the red carpet treatment, as you described. So Vladimir Putin now has a diplomatic victory. He doesn't have to fight for any more diplomatic legitimacy. And so he really has the upper hand. And so for Donald Trump to reassert American leverage and pressure means that he needs to take some actions, maintaining military support for Ukraine, of course, but he also has, the table has been set for him to enact more sanctions. The Senate, the United States Senate, 84 senators have co-sponsored a new sanctions measure. That's at least a step in the right direction. The president has been saying no to that. It's time for him to say yes and to reassert American leverage in this relationship, because if not, we're going to continue to see the kinds of growing strikes against Ukraine by Russia that we've seen in recent weeks.
Joel Rubin, former US Deputy Assistant Secretary of State. It's been great to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks, Carol.